We are having another heterodox East Asia seminar, Challenges to Open Discourse in the Asia Pacific. We will be comparing, different issues with having open dialogue across Australia, Korea, and, other countries that will be mentioned in the region. So the wonderful speakers that we are so happy to have are Katy Barnett from Melbourne Law School, Young-jin from Korea Times, and Michael Breen, also from Korea Times. And we may also have a few words from our own Joseph Yi, time permitting. So without further ado, I will invite Katy Barnett to start. Katy, are you ready?
So, what I want to talk about at first is the kind of issues which are what I would call hot button issues for Australia, right? And that might be different to hot button issues which are present in other jurisdictions in Australasia. But for us, the hot button issues include so by hot button issues, I mean issues where it's difficult to speak out about. So I'm a legal scholar. There are some things which are contentious in my field, but which not many people care about. So for example, there's this issue called fusion fallacy. No one cares about that other than about a handful of academics. But there are some issues that if you talk about it, you basically end up possibly attracting attention from a wide variety of people. And those issues in Australia include, I would say, climate change, transgender issues, same-sex marriage, Indigenous issues, and particularly over the last 2 years, the Israel-Gaza dispute, right? So if you venture an opinion on that, and you can, if you can actually get quite a lot of protest. And so what this tends to mean is that, oh, here we go. Thanks so much, Francis. So I think I'm up to slide 4. Yeah. So one problem from my point of view is that what we have in the current day is increasingly an activist approach to scholarship. What I mean by activist approach to scholarship is not simply advocating a point of view. It's saying that only one side of a debate is correct, that if anyone questions in any way, they are bad or evil, and if someone questions, it is necessary to take strong or physical actions to support it. And therefore, if you even ask questions, you can actually risk protest, cancellation, shunning, accusations of bigotry, and so forth. I would distinguish activism from advocacy. So, advocacy involves arguing a particular point of view. We all have points of view. And in my particular field, we hope that courts will adopt our views and try to put them as highly as we can. But it's good scholarly practice to note that other people may disagree with us, that some of the case law may go against us, and to refer to that and respect that and note that there are credible points of view which differ from ours and alert the reader as to where these can be found. So these are the hot button issues in Australia. If we can go to the next slide. So what I want to talk about next is what are the sources of Australian laws and legal norms on freedom of speech and academic freedom. So if we go to the next slide, yeah. So Australia is not like the US. We have no equivalent to the US Constitution's First Amendment or any legislation enshrining a general right to freedom of expression. We are party to international human rights treaties, and the High Court of Australia has held that we have an implied freedom of political communication, which is implied because the Constitution creates a system of representative government. We do have laws which prescribe hate speech, and we also have some states have laws which protect the right to freedom of speech and freedom of association. And this is actually the case in my home state of Victoria, where we have the Victorian Charter of Human Rights and Responsibilities. But it's a bit of a patchwork. So if we can go to the next slide. The first attempt to regulate academic freedom in Australia was through what's called the French Model Code. It's nothing to do with France. It's to do with a former High Court Justice, Robert French, who was asked to review universities after concerns were raised about academic freedom in universities in the 2000s. So in 2019, he suggested a model code, but it's not mandatory, it's voluntary. He suggested that universities should protect free speech and academic freedom, but that it could be restricted if it was necessary to achieve the core research and teaching, to comply with legal duties, and to foster the well-being of students and staff. And the government responded by actually passing a legislative provision which requires us, all universities, to have policies protecting freedom of speech and academic freedom. So if we go to the next slide. I provided you with an article written by myself and my colleague Bill Swanee on the need for academic freedom in Australia as an enforceable legal right. Now, Bill and I we're both legal academics, and we disagree on a lot of things. And what I really like about Bill's and my collaboration is, despite disagreeing on many, many issues, we have a mutual respect and we come to a better view as a result of that. So what's happened in Australia is we have individual codes of conduct and policies which may require academics to behave in certain ways, but which also allow for academic freedom. The way in which our contracts are negotiated in Australia, in Australian universities, is through enterprise bargaining agreements, where unions enter into collective agreements on behalf of all staff with each university. And some individual enterprise bargaining agreements have provisions guaranteeing academic freedom. So, for example, the University of Melbourne's current bargaining agreement has a provision guaranteeing academic freedom and giving a bit of a structure for what occurs if an academic says that their academic freedom has been curtailed. But that requires someone in the union or in the university to care about that and to put that provision in the contract. Conflicts can arise between academic freedom and codes of conduct. If we can go to the next slide, I'm going to talk about a case called Ridd and James Cook University. So Peter Ridd was a physics professor at James Cook University. He had a rather acerbic personality. He was not happy with his colleagues who were looking at climate change and the role of coral bleaching of the Great Barrier Reef. He criticised the research methods of his colleagues in a pretty frank way. His colleagues lodged a grievance and he was investigated for breaches of the university's codes of conduct. So the High Court of Australia found that the policy of the university and its code of conduct was actually in breach of Ridd's right to academic freedom, and the university had failed to have regard to it. So the good part of this decision is that the High Court of Australia confirmed the importance of academic freedom to Australian universities. But it was ultimately a Pyrrhic victory. Peter Reid, as I say, was very outspoken, and during the course of being investigated, he'd spoken to a whole range of other people about the investigation, and the High Court of Australia found that the university was entitled to terminate his employment on the basis that he had breached confidence. So not what he had said about the coral reefs, but the fact that he'd spoken about the investigation. So if we can go to the next screen. So now what I want to talk about is what legal changes might be made. If we can go to the next screen. In the article that Bill and I wrote, we suggested that an enforceable individual legal right to academic freedom is necessary and advisable. In the UK, it looked as if this kind of right might be introduced. I have to say I'm keener on it than Bill, but a new part was introduced into the Higher Education Act, which gave academics the right to bring a civil claim against a university or various other bodies if their right to academic freedom was challenged, for example, by being cancelled, no platformed, so forth. And there was a proposed statutory tort, a statutory wrong, which allowed someone to seek an injunction or seek damages or seek redress, which I thought was a good thing. I should confess here I'm a remedies law professor, so naturally I like remedies. However, the Starmer government, when they were elected, put the legislation on hold. It hadn't come into force yet, and then repealed the provisions. Firstly, the provisions requiring student unions to support freedom of speech, and secondly, the Section A7, which allowed academics to make a civil claim. Despite the fact that it wasn't successful in coming to fruition in the United Kingdom, I suggest that it might be good to have something similar in Australia. So for me as a lawyer, it's not enough to say that you have a right to something. A right only has substance if that right actually has teeth. In other words, if an individual can obtain remedies for a breach of that right. And it's in that way that I think we could perhaps look for some kind of legislative change. If we can go to the next slide. Okay. However, I have to say, over the past 2 years, I've become a little less optimistic about the possibility of dealing with academic freedom issues simply by legislative change, contractual change, whatever you want to talk about. And this is for the reason that there are deeper systemic issues.
About international relations.
Excuse me, there's someone who's talking.
Give me one moment. Yeah. I think you can keep going. Apologies about that, Katy.
Yep, thanks. So, the issues in practice are basically what the law says and what actually happens on the ground are different. In my experience, it's very difficult to question certain strands of scholarship in the current activist climate. And I'm actually like a fairly centrist progressive person, but in the last 10 years, I've found myself the Overton window has shifted and I've found myself regarded as unacceptable. And anyone who questions the current extremely radical orthodoxy on campus may potentially face protests, accusations of bigotry, and shunning by colleagues. Now, I'm a professor. I've already got tenure. I've already been promoted. I do not care particularly about being popular. But if you're a junior academic, you need the support of colleagues. You need your work to be cited. You need people you need people to agree to the publication of your work. You need people to support your promotion. And it's fundamental to have the support of your colleagues to get government grants in Australia and probably in other universities across the Anglosphere. So if all of your colleagues have a particular view and you wish to push against it, you risk destroying your career and friendships. And this has a significant chilling effect. Consequently, even if one has academic freedom on paper, the more one's colleagues kind of all share the one view, the less academic freedom one has. And this is why I have been a strong supporter of heterodox academy from the very beginning and of constructive dialogue. So if we can go to the next slide. So in my personal experience, many of the battles over academic freedom occur under cover of opaque university investigation processes, where the parties are forbidden from discussing the issue with anyone. And you can see this from the Reid case. And that also shows the risks when an academic raises an internal conflict with the media before it's resolved. Confidentiality and privacy are, of course, important, but in my experience, they seem to be used to hide the university's blushes, and there has been a concerning use of non-disclosure agreements. I will say when protests get aggressive, it's rare, but it does happen. In my own university, we had occupations, so-called, of buildings and offices in protest about the Israel-Gaza conflict. Australian universities have really struggled to know how to deal with the issue. And I actually personally received some threats for saying that protesters should not attack an Orthodox Jewish professor, that I thought this was not the right way to debate issues. And then, of course, they turned on me. So from my point of view, it's pivotal to have a heterodox faculty, to learn, to have received wisdom questioned, and to ensure that there is not groupthink. Someone said to me when I raised this, oh, do you think we should have quotas? No, I don't. But what I think we should do is praise universities when they have a variety of different scholars and when they demonstrate an ability to civilly disagree. So for about over 15 years now, I've run my subjects in such a way that students are free to disagree, and I've never gotten any pushback ever. Most students, other than a very small minority of activist students, are hungry for genuine discussion and disagreement. If we can go to the next slide. So, in part, I think as a broader thing, I think universities have to recall how to disagree civilly. I think also university leaders have to be strong and draw bright lines around unacceptable conduct. We also need to have the courage of our convictions. It is hard to stand up there and openly say something that's unpopular among one's peers, and I've done so on several occasions. However, I honestly don't see the point of being a professor if I can't ask questions and I can't civilly disagree with colleagues. So for me, I'm quite passionate about changing the incentives. Next slide. More broadly, part of the issue, in my view, stems back to the way in which universities and research is funded and incentivised in the Anglosphere. You've got publish or perish, grant applications, citation counts. All of this actually encourages conformity and towing the line with one's peers. Even peer review can result in conformity if a particular clique comes to dominate a field and excludes any academic questions. So I personally believe that we have to have a serious think about the incentives we have in the Anglosphere and what we think universities are for. Currently, I think the incentives steer away from heterodoxy and towards orthodoxy. I note that this opinion is purely my own and does not reflect the views of my employer, but I also note that I am protected by my own university's code of conduct and policies. I may have gotten in trouble with someone high up, and I showed that person what their own policy said. So, if we could go to the end. Next slide. So, thank you so much for asking me to talk today. If you want to talk to me further about this, I have my email here on the slide. Yeah. Okay, great. We can stop sharing now.
Sure.
You're welcome to share the slides with everyone after this if they want to. Talk to me about any of these things.
Sure. Thank you so much, Katy. I've just put your email in the chat if in case anyone wants to ask further questions, and we can share the slides as well. Of course, concluded like a true lawyer with the disclaimers. So I do think that's quite funny. And yeah, thanks for that great presentation. We have a lot to chew on. I see Sean, another Aussie overseas, has also already asked some questions, so we'll get to all those at the end. Next, for now, can we move on to Young-jin from Korea Times?
Francis.
Yes.
Yeah. Actually, Sean had that quick question. Should we ask that to Katy now?
Okay.
I can read the question of Sean.
Yeah.
Sorry,
Okay.
it's not a quick question.
Oh, no. I can say quickly, Sean. I give a quick answer.
Okay, I've got
yes,
5 minutes
there have
to my
been
class.
campaigns to deplatform. Yes, I've stood against them. I'm consistent on either side. No one should be cancelling anyone, and I actually think there should be a tort preventing people from cancelling. Just because something is relational aggression doesn't mean it's permissible. So I'm happy to share more about my views on that, but we need to be able to have civil discussions. Cancelling people, deplatforming people. Okay, it's not as bad as actually attacking people, but it's not great and it chills discussion. What we need to learn to do is have a civil discussion instead. And yeah.
Thank you very much. I completely agree with you, and I'm just 3 minutes from starting my class, so I'll just have to clock out now. Thank you very much.
Sure.
No, thank you.
Catch you later, Sean.
Okay, see you.
All right, let's move on to Young-jin.
Katy, just to follow up, are the conservative pro-Israeli groups powerful in Australia? Have they effectively deplatformed anyone?
No, currently there have been some attempts. There's been a real shift, right? So previously I would say that Israeli and Jewish organisations commanded the cultural heights, and there's been a flip over the last 4 years. And so there have actually been attempts to deplatform people. I think 1 or 2 successfully, but then the backlash has been so severe and people have been reinstated and so forth that it's actually now going the other way around. So now Jewish people and Israeli people can't get a platform. They get protested, and neither situation is ideal. Like, this is not the way to deal with things. But I would say basically what's happened in left-wing terms is Jewish and Israeli people have been moved from the category of oppressed to oppressor, and therefore regarded as not acceptable among progressive circles.
I see. Okay, thank you, Katie. Back to you, Francis.
All right, thank you for those questions. Let's move to Young-jin. Young-jin, are you ready?
I'm ready.
Okay.
I feel, the relieved to see, the backside of my, the head of my friend, Michael Breen, on, on the screen. Hey, Mike, how are you?
I'm fine. I'm looking forward to listening to what you have to say.
Hey, the Katy Barnett Katy Barnett's presentation was beautiful, and especially it's the goes deep down to the details of the what's happening in her country in reference to the the global affairs as well. I am a journalist. I've been journalist for a long period of time, so I oftentimes tended to overgeneralize things. So simplify things. Maybe if you have any issues with my simplification and overgeneralization, please attack me, cancel me. So now my approach is I'm going to give you the three the examples in which they talk but they don't talk. It's like the in three examples in which they they're as if they are the talking different dialects, never finding solution to the problems they commonly have. One example is number one example is Trump and the Xi Jinping summit. And last week the President Trump flew to Beijing. He met Xi Jinping for 2 days. The world's two most powerful leaders face to face at a moment when the planet desperately needed them to deliver. What did they produce? Handshake, a photo opportunity, a big framework, plans to meet again. On Iran war, Strait of Hormuz is still closed, global fear crisis grinding on, shipping frozen, nothing concrete. On trade, gestures. On technology, AI, cyber security, the most consequential battlefield of the century, nothing. Why? Because both sides walked in, pressing their own assertions, are angling for their best interest at the expense of a broader objective. And second case, it's Israel and Palestine. That's an important piece of Iran crisis. Root cause of it, maybe. It's Israel-Palestinian relationship and scourge bad relationship between the two, bad blood between the two, for decades of it. The both sides have locked into or nothing posture, my land or no land, my narrative, no narrative, my existence or yours. What is absent? What has always been absent is a broader objective that both sides can see themselves in, a reason to stop fighting over the past long enough to face the future together. And example number three, Korea, right now. In Korea, June 3rd, local elections are upon us. The campaign is just kicked off. It is reaching fever pitch. And issues are many, but prevailing mood is the thing underneath everything. Here, it goes back to one night. That's December 3rd, 2024. The night President Yoon Suk-yeol declared martial law. A sitting president tried to suspend democracy. He failed. He was impeached. He was convicted, sentenced to life. But the wound didn't heal. It split open wider. The ruling parties are pressing on hard to win voters. Remember what they did. And the opposition cannot bring itself to fully admit Yoon's fault. Instead, they are rallying conservatives on the need to keep the liberals in check. Both sides, like any political entities anywhere, are thriving on divisions, thriving on polarization. Each side needs the other side to be the enemy. And the bigger issue, absent, nowhere in the conversation. And now, here's what I have learned, or I'm trying to, I've been trying to press on. From watching Korea, from watching the world, from 30 plus years in journalism, everyone of these conflicts, Trump, Xi, and Israel-Palestine, Korea's left and right, shares the same flow. They are all fights over present. Who gets what? Who is right? Who is in charge? But there's something coming that does not care about any of those categories. We need bigger issues. We need broader approach. We need something large enough, force all sides to set aside their differences and talk seriously again. The issue is artificial intelligence. It's a runaway development. If left unchecked, will lead to downfall of human agency. It is an existential threat and not a theoretical one, a real one happening now. Jobs are disappearing, and the way we work, create, think, and even trust each other is being reshaped at a speed no political cycle can keep up with. Right now, few checks and balances in place. Almost done. There's no bigger issue than this. How do we keep humans in the driver's seat as AI is being built? And this is the question, I think, the big enough to make us put down our other fights, big enough to pull everyone to the same table, same page, same line, big enough to make dialogue not just possible but necessary. And I made this case a couple of weeks ago in Delphi, Greece, at the Delphi Economic Forum, in place where the ancient Greeks went to learn the truth about what was coming. I would like to share that speech with you now. We are in Delphi. The ancient Greeks came here for one thing, to know truth about what was coming. I hope that is why we are here too. The singularity is not a science fiction anymore. It is here, and we are not ready. The people building AI, brilliant, driven, well-meaning people, don't know where it ends. They are living their Einstein moment. Einstein split atom and spent the rest of his life haunted by what he had unleashed. Ask Hassabis, Sam, and Dario, and they cannot tell you whether artificial intelligence will lift humanity up or wipe it out. We cannot accept that as an answer. We cannot accept just the two options, conquer or be conquered. There's a third path. We will build it ourselves. Led Zeppelin's immigrant song. I keep hearing it in my head. Valhalla, I'm coming. Not a battle cry, as a warning. Time is running out. If we don't act now, we will be gone before we even know what happened. When Industrial Revolution came, we had Luddites. They resisted, they smashed machines, they slowed things down, they made people think. This time, we will not get that luxury. The speed is different, stakes are different. So who will slow it down this time? Who will make the people think? If they cannot, who will? The media will. Media should. Humanity is made from Christ, the Buddha, Allah, Socrates, Confucius, Jeongyagyong, Shakespeare, Hanyang, Rushdie, and the countless small and great minds across every civilization. They form traditions that have spent thousands of years asking what it means to be human. We cannot hand that question to a few tech companies in California or China. The answer doesn't begin in Silicon Valley or Shenzhen. It begins at the grassroots. Philosophers, sociologists, economists, historians, scholars need to think hard about what an AI future means for human beings, not in isolation, together, across borders. They need to produce clear principles, rules for how AI gets built, the rules that protect the human rights, keep the human beings in the driver's seat. Now, the media is in trouble. We are being buffeted by AI as much as anyone. We are as much at a loss as the rest of society, but we have a role that nobody else can play. Scholars can produce principles, activists can march, politicians can legislate, but none of that happens unless people know it is happening, unless we are informed about what is at stake, unless we feel it. The media is a loudspeaker, not to sensationalize AI, not to terrify, and not to reassure too easily, but to do what good journalism has always done: tell people the truth about the world they are living in and give them the reason to respond and to change for the better. The question of what AI does to human dignity, to human labor, to human creativity, to human beings is not a tech story. It is a story of us, our children, and everything we represent. It belongs on front pages. It belongs at the top of websites. It belongs editorials. It belongs in questions we ask every leader, every scientist, every CEO who sits across us. I've been in conversation with the president of Korea's top universities about exactly this: a global grassroots campaign, a consensus strong enough to force human-centered AI development onto the world agenda. And I plan to reach out to colleagues in the global media to join. I hope some of them are in this room today. We did not come to Delphi for an oracle to tell us our fate. We came to decide. So let us not wait. Let us begin. That's the end of it. In the audience, there was my good friend Stephen Dunbar. He's an international president of the New York Times. Thank you for listening.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Young-jin. That was wonderful, and I'm sure people will have a lot of questions about your speech and also your insights. How about we now move on to Michael Breen, who I'm so pleased is actually in person with with Joseph's class. So yes, that's Michael Breen. Do you have anything to present or anything like that?
That's fine. Yeah, you can put it here.
Okay. All right, then take it away.
Okay, just a minute. Where's the camera? I'm trying to move the Zoom screen to here. Sometimes it works, sometimes
just so you get the pleasure of my face.
Okay.
Yeah, pleasure or disaster.
There you go. There you go, Mr. O. How do I look? Is my hair okay?
We're still trying to get the camera to turn to Michael Breen.
Don't be shy.
Okay. I want the camera to follow me.
Maybe the camera only likes Joseph. Who knows?
Oh, just go ahead.
Hopefully, all right.
Follow you. Okay.
Okay. Okay. Thanks very much, everybody. After listening to Katy Barnett, which I found very, very interesting presentation, and to Young-jin as well, I got lots of thoughts. I actually prepared a few things, so I want to try and stick to what I was going to say rather than go off on a tangent, but forgive me if I do. So I wanted to sort of bring this to Korea a bit, because this is where my experiences, my background, perhaps I should introduce myself. I've been here for 40 odd years as a foreign correspondent, first of all. And then about 20 odd years ago, I went into public relations. So I've seen this sort of issue from two sides. And I still write books and columns. So I'm still very engaged in media. And in fact, write columns for Mr. O twice a month. So I'd like to touch on, actually, one thing I should say, because it's just to get it out of my mind, some of the issues that you talked about made me want to say there are some issues which are, there's a lot of shouting and yelling about. And I would say that that's fine, that we're able to discuss these things, even if they get people worked up and so on. And this sort of issue that Katy flagged, this sort of current sort of cancelling and deplatforming and that sort of thing, this is quite a disturbing trend in the last decade or two, because it shuts that down, of course. But there are other issues where society, and I don't think this is necessarily something that can be legislated, it's where society is uncomfortable discussing things. So, and the reason for that is, let's say three of us are having a discussion about an issue, and we realize that one of the people invited represents a view that we think is very extreme. By participating in the discussion, we're giving credibility to what they think. And there are some issues in society that either we're not ready to give credibility to, or which for moral or whatever ideological reasons seem to be unacceptable. So what I'm trying to say here is I can sort of understand where people, oh, there I am. I can understand where people are coming from when they appear to oppose free speech. In some cases, and I'll give some examples later about Korea. But having said that, let me just say I'd like to touch on three things, three issues in Korea, and then talk a little bit about the philosophical question, as I see it, that underlies them. So, three things about Korea that are a bit worrying on the free speech, from the free speech point of view. One is the defamation law. The defamation in Korea is extremely powerful legally. I've been a victim, as Mr. O knows, I was a victim of it myself, getting sued by Samsung for writing a column in the Korea Times that they didn't like. They tried to sue me for $1 million, which is probably about $999,000 more than I had at the time. So that was quite disturbing. So I've seen that firsthand. But the defamation law here is very unusual in two aspects. One is that in Korea it's unusual. One is that it is both civil and criminal, which means you can not only object to what somebody has said or written and then take them to court for them to be censured or even fined, but you can actually have them jailed. The other disturbing, or the other standout feature of defamation in Korea, the law, is that truth is not a defense. This is a very unusual thing. Let me sort of give an example. Let's say I'm a thief, and I've been in jail for a few years for stealing, and I come out of jail, and then you say publicly, or you write a column in a newspaper saying, Breen the thief. I can sue you for defamation, and your defense would be, yeah, but he is a thief. Look, he was in jail. But the court could say, it doesn't matter if what you said was true, you still damaged his reputation, or you offended him, and they can find you guilty. So this is a very unusual aspect, makes defense in defamation cases in this country very difficult, because the court seems to accept the emotions or what's happened to the offended person as being more important than whether what you said was true or not. Let me give you some example of people here who've got into trouble with this. Chung Bong-ju, the satirical podcaster, was jailed for spreading false rumors, as the court said, about then presidential candidate Lee Myung-bak. Now, 7 years after that, Lee Myung-bak was actually jailed himself for offences related to what he was what the podcast had been talking about. But that didn't stop the podcast of being jailed. Defense commentator Ji Man-won was imprisoned for disputing the official interpretation of the 1980 uprising in Gwangju. Political commentator Woo Jong-chang received a prison sentence for comments he made about Cho Guk, the former justice minister. The operator of the Sojang YouTube channel received a suspended sentence and a massive fine for spreading false allegations about celebrities. And so it goes. Academics are also not exempt from this. Park Gyu-ha, professor at Sejong University, I think it was, spent 7 years in the courts fighting charges related to a book she wrote about comfort women. Professor Yu Sok-chun also faced several years of legal proceedings after comments. He didn't write a book. He made comments in a lecture, and presumably his students reported him saying something derogatory about comfort women. He spent several years in the courts over that. Another good example is Chun Doo-hwan, the former dictator, in, I forget when it was now, 2017, 18, sometime like that, was convicted of defaming, in his memoir, defaming a Catholic priest. The interesting thing was that the Catholic priest he defamed was dead. So in this country, you can get arrested, and Chun was found guilty, you can get arrested for defaming a dead person. So in theory, if I say something negative about Kim Il-sung, his family, if there's any of his family members here, they could have me arrested in this country. I don't think that's likely to happen, but, you know, it's possible. So I'm not suggesting, I'm sure as you listen, if you're familiar with some of these names, I'm sure there's something going on, well, Chun Doo-hwan deserved it. Or he criticized Lee Myung-bak, well, he shouldn't have been jailed. You know, it doesn't matter what side, whether you support these people or not. That is not the point of all of this. Second thing I like to flag is more recent. It's anti-fake news and censorship legislation. Governments around the world are struggling with misinformation, social media manipulation, online abuse, and that sort of thing. And Korea is not unique. But Korean governments, both conservative and progressive, repeatedly discuss legislation aimed at controlling speech in the name of fighting fake news. And the problem is that these proposed laws, I'm not sure what the status is at the moment, but the proposed laws are often quite vague, which leads to the question, well, who defines what is misinformation? Who defines what counts as hate speech, and so on and so forth? Third thing, as you may be familiar with, the national security law in this country is quite strict. For decades, when I was a foreign correspondent in the dictatorship era, we used to refer to this as draconian. This was a law used to prosecute dissidents. It was the draconian national security law. And the main feature of this law was it criminalized praising North Korea. And yet, everyone stood against it and complained. As I said, we called it draconian, which means we obviously thought it was a bad thing. And yet the law still stands, which means that progressive presidents, pro-democracy presidents in the democratic era haven't changed it. So we won't go into the reasons, but there are national security arguments for having restrictions on speech when it comes to national security. So the point I'm making here is that this area is a bit more complicated than it seems. But what I'd like to ask is, The simple way of approaching this is we might say, well, free speech is good. You know, these sort of laws and things should be abolished. These restrictions against free speech should be lifted. But I want to ask the question, why is free speech good? I'm thinking of Korea here, but I think it's something that in the last decade or two in the Western world where you didn't have to raise that question. It was kind of obvious. But now you do. So I'd say, why is free speech good? What is the argument in favor of it? Because when you examine this more closely, there are competing goods which the people trying to restrict speech are arguing for. For example, social harmony, public order, reputation. People's reputation is an important thing. You shouldn't just be free to slag people off. You know, national security is a good. So why should so I'm getting confused here. Why should free speech override these things? You know, why should an argument about my reputation should prevent any of you from writing anything or saying anything public negative about me? Why does your free speech more important and allow you to do that? So one obvious answer is that truth emerges through open debate, and we need that for our democracy to function. I mean, how do we talk about the people who are running for election if we can't talk freely? But there's a deeper reason than the political system, and I think there's a deeper reason that underpins law. The law itself doesn't catch everything about life. It's just a rule book, basically. And it's an important rule book because most social issues in democratic societies, and particularly you notice this in America, most social issues end in a legal change or decision of some kind, and then the issues fade away. That's not the case in this country, but it is in most democracies. Why is free speech so important? Well, I would say that the underlying thing is that free speech allows us to examine life itself, our existence, and how we wish to approach life and how we wish to live. Without freedom of speech, we cannot do this. Let me just do quickly for a show of hands. I don't want to embarrass anybody. How many people believe in God? Put your hand up. How many people don't believe in God? How many people are not sure? Okay. Now, I'll bet you, in your lifetime, for some of you, your position might shift one way or the other, you know. But you need the freedom to be able to do that. You need to be able to ask a question. I mean, imagine if somebody burst through the door now and I got arrested for having asked the question. You know, what does that mean for our life? It means we cannot ask these questions. We cannot discuss them. We cannot even think about them. Welcome to North Korea. You know, that's what North Korea is like. So there are societies that are that bad. So that's why I'd say that free speech is so important, because it allows us to examine who we are as human beings and how we want to live. There's another dimension here that I would say is important, seeing as we're talking about media, and that is the unusual power of media in Korean society. And this really impacts this issue, is relevant for this issue. I didn't fully understand this when I worked as a journalist, but when I went into public relations, I saw it much more clearly. Korean politicians and bureaucrats politicians and bureaucrats everywhere in the world pay attention to media in a free society, and even in an unfree society. But in Korea, they're unusually, exceptionally sensitive to what is said in the press. So much so that companies will get calls from government agencies saying, why is this negative article about you in the paper? We're just about to approve your application for something, but we can't do it now. And then the company might say, but it's nonsense, it's not true. Say, that doesn't matter, that is not the point, get it out of the... So then the PR people in the company are ringing up the media and begging them to take articles offline, out of the paper, in order for government to be free to then make decisions in their favor. And it's got nothing to do with truth, but a lot to do with the power of media. So we often talk about government control of media, but I don't think we talk enough about media control of government in that sense. So historically, this goes back to the dictatorship days, the reasons for this, when that sort of dynamic that I just described was important, that the government wanted to keep social order, but if there was negativity in the media about companies that needed supporting, that would be problematic for them. So the media learned to use this power. And it's the reason that the Chaebol pay such huge donations to them, even now. I would say that the old explanation has shifted because we're now in a democratic era, but the thing remains the same. The reason for it now, in my opinion, is that as the authoritarian government power, say in the blue, has moved out of the Blue House, has moved out of the building, into its place has come a new authority, and it's the people. The idea of democracy in this country is very much that the people run the country. The government has to do what the people want. In other democracies, that is not the case. In other democracies, I'm not saying every other democracy, there's a sort of a spectrum here, but in other democracies, the people consent to be governed. They elect a government in, and then that government has to rule as it sees fit, even if popular opinion doesn't like what they're deciding sometimes. In this country, there is a sort of feeling that the people, much stronger feeling that the people rule. So I could go on, and I often will, but I often do, but I just want to sort of come back to this idea of the truth, that freedom of speech only makes sense if society is committed to truth. And truth is a lot harder than people think. One thing that strikes me in Korea is that debates about free speech often become power struggles rather than real truth-seeking endeavors. And I'll stop there because I'm going to keep rambling on. I'll stop there and just saying that I think this, for you guys doing media studies and then going into the workplace, this is something that you find you will be struggling with for years to come. So thank you.
Okay,
All right.
thank you, Michael.
Thank you so much, Michael Breen. We will be, I think, Joseph, I think it would be a good time to open for questions. Or did you have any concluding words that you wanted to say?
Let's have a couple of questions, and then
Sure.
I can do a short presentation.
Sure. While the students are thinking of some questions, Sean asked me to bring back up his question to Katy Barnett. So specifically what he was asking about, I will just summarize it a little bit. So he was saying that since October the 7th, a number of scholars and public intellectuals in Australia and abroad have made revisionist statements justifying the mass killing of civilians by Hamas militia or dogmatic denialist statements about any claims that civilians were raped by those militias. No one inside the Australian university system has, as far as he knows, called for those people to be deplatformed or even cancelled. So his question is, have there been any concerted campaigns by conservatives or pro-Israeli groups to deplatform them? So this is just his curiosity about what's going on about that, I guess.
So my answer to that is yes. There's an academic in Australia by the name of Randa Abdel Fattah, who is a Palestinian academic, and she made statements in the wake of October 7, saying it was a conspiracy and so forth. There are attempts to get her grant removed. in part because of some of the statements that she'd made. She also arranged a school excursion where she told children to chant "Globalise the Intifada," and things like that. And then there were attempts so she was a speaker at a book festival, or several book festivals, and there were attempts to get her to stand down from being an author there. As well as an academic, she's a children's book author. It did actually kind of partly destroy the Adelaide Writers' Festival, but then there was a backlash against it, and then she was headlining the Sydney Writers' Festival. So yes, there have been disputes over this, and disputes over to what extent should she be able to argue something that I think we get back to Michael's point. Some things are pretty rebarbative, I suppose, arguing that, rape and murder didn't occur and it's all some kind of false flag operation, things like that. It's pretty upsetting, particularly if you happen to know someone who was killed. On the other hand, I strongly felt that it was a mistake to try to no platform Ms. Abdel Fattah. I have been a member of a Jewish organisation and I stepped down as a result of them taking a position that that there should be conditions upon her speech. I think it's much better for her to say those things and for us to see her saying those things and then to question her. That's my personal view. So in terms of while people were speaking, I was thinking of the book by Timur Kuran. It's called Public Lies, Private Truths. And it's on the phenomenon of preference falsification. So we had a referendum here, talking of democracy, where there was a question of whether Indigenous people should have a provision in our constitution. Now, most of the public debate in the media strongly suggested yes. All right. Very, very, very strongly suggested yes. So, and all the major companies, all the political parties all came out saying yes. If you did express the opinion no, you faced considerable backlash. Then the vote occurred and it was 60% no. But I actually suspect if it occurred now, it will be a higher percent. So what this meant is that people were engaging in preference falsification. They were not actually properly talking about what their concerns were with this model, and it meant that there wasn't actually a feedback loop. So it may have been that the provision could have been, it could have been improved, things like that, but it wasn't, because people weren't speaking frankly about it. They weren't able to talk about their worries. They weren't able to question. I wanted to write something in the newspaper. It's the one time I've ever been pressured into withdrawing something. I was told at the time, if you write no, I'm part Aboriginal actually, but if I write no, I may actually be threatened, physically threatened. And there was nothing the university could do that. I now regret that I withdrew my opinion, but and that's part of why I'm passionate about being here today, because otherwise we can't properly discuss things and we can't get the feedback necessary to improve what we do. So, and then people engage in preference falsification. So, I mean, we're all familiar with it. Some of it's just politeness. Someone says, do you like my dress? You say, oh, it's lovely, even if you don't. but it can be really bad if it's, oh, are you going to vote yes for the voice? Yes, I am. And then they privately tell you, well, actually, I hate it and I'm going to vote no. So, yeah, that's an example I can tell you about.
All right, thank you for that, Katie, and that hark back to the voice to Parliament. I was in
Dramatic.
yes, I was in the University of Western Australia at the time, and forgive the technical terminology, but I remember it being quite the shit show.
No, it was dreadful. It was
yeah,
absolutely dreadful. And like we had protests all over our university and they were quite aggressive, but yeah.
Yes, that's right. I see Young-jin has made some some comments to Michael. Young-jin, did you want to voice them just in case people can't read what's in the chat, or it might take a little while for them to, and then ask Michael for clarifications?
It's not actually questions, and I respect the Michael Breen is my the favorite the columnist. He's been working with us for a long period of time. But some of what he said, it's like the national security law. It's as good as as good as it's dead. It has not been used for some time now. I think it's reflecting the shift in the society. It used primarily by the dictators in the past in this country to oppress the liberals, not just the liberals, but the freedom of expressions or the political opponents. But now it's rarely used, and I think the people have the grown weary about the times it was the briskly used against the political the opponent by the dictators. And number two, the media's influence. Like 20 years ago, it was legacy media was quite influential, and when we spoke, the government and the corporation listened. Nowadays, I think I'd say it has the power of the legacy media has been quite weakened. And one example, recent example, is the refusal by the president to attend a big the international conference hosted by the nation's biggest newspaper. It was rarely happened before, because for instance, the newspaper in this case, that's a 조선일보. 조선일보 is has been quite influential. The commanded the largest the readership, the newspaper readership in this country, but their influence, their power has been in decline, as with the rest of the legacy media. So nowadays, the government paying less attention and less attention to the corporations are paying less attention to what the newspapers say. On the top of that, the shift in the media landscape, that is the emergence of the the YouTubes and individualistic the media outlets. They're overpowering the legacy media. So now obviously people do not the growing having grown the weary of the legacy media. It oftentimes it's the coming in the form of the lecturing, and move to the YouTube's algorithms to listen to the whatever they want. And that's the small objections to the great the presentation made by the Michael Breen, my friend. Thank you.
Okay. Let me do a quick presentation and then Michael can respond. Francis, can I start?
Yeah, of course, sure, no worries.
Okay, sure. So I wanted to present on a bit of a theoretical angle. Can everyone see my screen? My presentation, yes?
Yes, we can.
Yes. Okay, great. So my question is, how do you deal with disagreement and opposing facts? And then my key concepts are epistemic institutions and your orientation plus your concentration, your power. And so let me show you my 2x2. And so I stress two variables. What is your view on procedure? Do you support open discourse, procedural rights and norms, or do you feel that open discourse and free speech can harm victims? And then the second variable is your institutional concentration. Does one party control all the mainstream institutions, knowledge and political, or is it more dispersed? And then the fourth quadrant here is where you have one ideological coalition that is both zero-sum and high institutional power. Then the dominant coalition treats opponents not as citizens to be persuaded, but as threats to be contained. And I think Korea is a really good example of this kind of quadrant number 4. So historically, started with the conservatives who used a national security law to restrict pro-North Korea discourse. And then later, progressive coalitions developed a similar restrictive logic around colonial memory, comfort women, Gwangju, and other historical issues. And so you see this and you see this still today. You had this foreign guy, Johnny Somali, who did lots of provocative things, including kissing and hugging a comfort woman statue, and he was in prison for 6 months. And then just a couple of days ago, we had the celebration. Starbucks did a promotion on 5/18, which coincided with the Gwangju uprising, and so the CEO was fired. So his intention was not relevant. The intention of the CEO, what was relevant was whether it psychologically harmed the victims. And I thought it was ironic because Starbucks does promotions on many days, including March 26th, which is a day very important for conservatives because that's when North Korea sank the Cheonan vessel, the Navy boat, allegedly. But when Starbucks did a promotion on March 26th, nobody really cared, right? And so again, so the key variable is this kind of institutional power. So that's the cause. And so that leads to this kind of epistemic exit among conservatives to social media, as Michael Breen mentioned, and that has an important consequence. So as mainstream institutions narrow their range of legitimate debate, conservative actors migrate toward alternative media, which contains both more empirically verified counterclaims and weakly verified conspiratorial claims. And so on the more empirically verified, things like, for example, comfort women. The mainstream media talks about how comfort women were abducted and kidnapped by Japanese soldiers. But the alternative media, right-wing media, such as Ilbe, discusses the fact that there hasn't been any verification that any comfort woman was abducted by the Japanese military. Okay. And so at least on Japan policy, the previous conservative President Yoon relied on the alternative media framing to normalize relations with Japan. And this has been a relatively successful policy that the next, progressive President Lee Jae-myung has continued. On the other hand, alternative media also shares many less verified claims. One of them being that foreign hackers, North Korean hackers, Chinese hackers, they infiltrated the National Election Commission. And President Yoon seems to have been influenced by this because this is one of his justification for martial law. During martial law, he actually sent soldiers to the National Election Commission to investigate this claim. Okay, which led to, as you know, martial law, impeachment, and this kind of political crisis for the right now. And so what you see is that when you have one-party dominance, it leads to this kind of epistemic fragmentation that two parties, we no longer have shared facts. And when that happens, that leads to this real crisis in democracy. Okay. And so, yeah, I just wanted to add that to our discussion. Thank you. Okay, back to you, Francis.
All right. Thank you so much, Joseph. And thank you, Katie, for staying on to listen for a bit as well. Okay, so let's go back to maybe Michael, Breen, if you had responses
Okay.
to
Oh, thank you,
Young-jin.
Katie. Right. Sure. Michael, I guess you might have the last word.
Oh,
Yes.
well, no, you should have the last word. I'll just, I think Mr. O's.
Oh, let me stop sharing. Okay. Okay.
Mr. O's 2 points, national security law. He's right. It is a bit of an old example. It's still on the books. I think what interestingly on that front is that under Korean law, this is a slightly different point, but under Korean law, it is a crime, under the national security law, it is a crime to spy for North Korea. This is weird, isn't it? It doesn't like me. It's a crime to spy for North Korea under Korean law and under national security law. And I believe that that part of the law still does get enforced, but it is not a crime. There's no Korean legal provision for people who spy for any other country.
Okay.
So that's something that I think is being worked on somewhere by some people. But I'd agree that it was a bit of an old example I gave. The second thing about the power of the media, what I have to say is, you're right that in the Chosen Ilbo example, the conservative media has lost a lot of influence, and I think that goes back to when 10 years ago, they failed to support Park Geun-hye. They were having a fight with her Blue House at the time, and when she got into trouble, they failed to support her, and as a result, a lot of conservatives migrated to YouTube. So you're right that we have a current progressive president who took it upon himself to not attend a Chosen Ilbo event, and it was obviously a calculated decision. But what I'm talking about is slightly different. I'm not talking so much about political influence. What I'm talking about is, regardless of political position, it's the power of the media. And what I would say to you is, in journalism, you don't quite understand this. When you have power, you actually don't, power is nothing. It doesn't exist. You don't sort of realize you have it until it's taken away from you. But I didn't notice this until I came out of journalism. I will tell you that if there's a negative story in the Korea Times, or particularly in the big circulating Korean papers about a company or a government agency, it is panic stations in those, in the company and they have external. I mean, one of the things I do, the reason I know this is I'm a crisis communications consultant. So when, something like if Starbucks were to ring me up and say, we need you, that would be great for me, because this is the sort of thing I get involved in. How to advise them, how do you manage this? How do you handle this? And I'll tell you that there is a massive industry of people who are totally focused on whatever's coming out in the media. And that is because in this country, unlike other countries where media can be ignored, I'll finish on just with an illustration of this. It's like if Joseph and I were the Prime Minister and Deputy Prime Minister of a country, and we read in the paper that this thing had happened. One of our junior ministers was caught doing something like this. In Korea, there would be an immediate reaction. He'd probably get fired immediately, something like that. But what we would do if we were rulers of this imaginary country is the first thing we'd say, is this true? You say, I don't know, look, I'll ring up. I know the guy knows him well. I'll ring him up and find out. Say, no, it's nonsense. It's just the media being mischievous. Okay, we'll ignore it then. That doesn't happen in Korea, and that's because the press is so powerful. That's what I'd say to that.
Sure. I wonder if the press is powerful, if like moral narratives are powerful. That in a way, like like for example, like let's say like the Gwangju narrative, right? What happened at Starbucks? Even if the media wanted to criticize the narrative, I don't think any media journalist would.
That's true.
Right. And so it seems like it's not so much the media that's powerful, it's just the power of very simple moral narratives.
That's true. I often get told when I submit columns, I write for Korea Times, I write for a couple of other papers. I did Chosun Ilbo for 2 years. I often get told, you can say that because you're a foreigner. So there are things, Korean journal, when there's public sentiment or when there's the wave is going in a particular direction, people don't often stand up and go against it. But the foreigner can and not be penalized for it.
Right, and so it seems like it comes in waves. Like I remember 1970s, you had the kind of anti-communist narrative, which is, and no one can really challenge that.
Right.
And now now today, there's kind of like this, kind of alternative wave, right? Where like narratives on like Gwangju or comfort women, it's hard to challenge that because and it's not so much like what is actually true. Like, are you a good person? Right. You mentioned the comfort women. I said earlier in my talk that this Professor Park of Sejong spent 7 years in the courts. What she said in her book that seemed to be so offensive was that some of the comfort women were prostitutes. That is a fact. Initially, the comfort women recruited by the military in Japan before World War II were Japanese prostitutes. But none of that mattered. The facts didn't matter in this case. This morning, I drove past the Comfort Women statue. The police have removed barricades from around it, so there it is, sitting opposite the Japanese embassy. And I'll say something that will get me branded as a right-winger, that'll be very unpopular, that you won't see in the Korean media. And I'm not a right-winger, particularly, but I think this is offensive and absurd, and that statue should be removed. This is sitting across the road from the embassy of an allied country, reminding them of something they did that has all been buried and forgotten 80 years ago. How about if we had a statue of allied prisoners of war in front of Korean embassies around the world, because the Koreans were the most brutal of the guards in POW camps in World War II. That would be unthinkable, but it's kind of an equivalent. But now, you don't have to agree with me, but I think it's an argument that can be made, but it never gets made. Everybody pretends to think the same about this issue. And then the issue sort of shifts and changes somehow. Sure. Maybe a more provocative would be like, Vietnam War, atrocities, statues, right? Right. Okay. Anyway, thank you. Thanks.
Sit down.
Right. Okay.
I think, Joseph, maybe to finish up, I know we just have a few minutes. Young-jin, I think, has some, is dying to say something to Michael Breen again.
I like him. I like his, assertions. But I think on the subject of comfort woman, always put that, the comfort woman issue in the context of the, brutal, the colonialism committed by the Japanese. The Japanese are known for all kinds of, the atrocity committed against, the people, what they call the emperors, the citizens. We were made against our will, into the people under the emperor. We didn't, the choose to be the subject of Japanese, the imperialism. They came, they conquered, and they even forced us to change the names. Then, when all those the circumstances put into context, and thinking about the woman, Korean woman, our the mobilized to serve the soldiers, Japanese soldiers on the front line. Maybe some of them, the voluntarily, did the things, for the, the benefit of their own or their parents. But just to think about, those circumstances, it is, they are the masters, we are the slaves. What, the voice did we have? And on the top of that, the social system under the imperial Japan made us second rate, not even citizens, slaves, right? So what did, the right did we have? So please, put that, the colonial context into the whatever claims that, the comfort woman were the voluntary army of the prostitutes serving the proud Japanese, the soldiers, Japanese, imperial soldiers.
Sure. Mr. Young-jin, thanks for the comments. We will have in 2 weeks, we're going to have another forum on comfort women issue. So you and Mr. Breen are welcome to that. Maybe not today. Okay, Francis, if there's nothing else, you can wrap up. If there's anyone else want to speak. Okay.
I think we are reaching time, so it would be a good time to wrap up over here. So thank you everybody for coming to speak, especially our speakers. Katy Barnett has unfortunately left already, but Young-jin and Michael Breen, so nice to have you. And of course, Joseph for hosting and all of your wonderful students and other attendees here.